I don't want to blindside you, but we have some breaking news coming in right now.
Yeah.
Mr. Trump's youngest son, Barron, apparently now will not be a delegate at the RNC this summer. Barron has come up.
A waitress was stunned when she saw the note left on her bill after serving Barron Trump. The encounter at the quiet cafe started out as a normal day, but ended in a moment that left her in tears and Barron instantly walking away. Her seemingly small act of leaving a note with a tip turned into a life-changing gesture. Let's uncover the message that brought her to tears and left the world wondering what's really behind this simple and extraordinary moment. A familiar face in a cafe. It was one of those afternoons when time seemed to pass slowly. The usual mix of coffee and pastries smelled in the air, but the cafe was nearly empty. The slow hum of life inside reflected the weight the waitress was carrying on her shoulders. The bills looming, the tips dwindling, and the feeling that her hard work was barely keeping her afloat. But as the door creaked open, the stranger who walked in seemed ready to break the fragile calm she was holding on to. She was wiping down the last table when the door's bell chimed. In walked someone who looked striking but understated. He was tall with an air of calm confidence that made heads turn. Following him were two men, their watchful eyes scanning the room, but their movements subtle enough not to draw too much attention. For a second, she hesitated. It was not every day someone walked in with what could only be described as a security detail. Without much thought, she approached and greeted the young man, jotting down his simple order of a cappuccino and a croissant.
Let's play drum. What's that big red thing doing?
It was not until she walked back to the counter that recognition clicked. This was Barron Trump. The realization sent a small jolt through her, but she quickly brushed it aside. He was just another customer, or at least that is what she told herself. As the coffee machine hissed and steamed, her eyes wandered back to his table. Unlike most people his age, he was not glued to his phone. Instead, he seemed lost in thought, occasionally gazing out the window. There was a quietness about him, something that did not align with the image of someone who had grown up in the spotlight. When she brought his order to the table, he thanked her with a small smile. It was a simple moment, but something about his tone struck her. It was not pretentious or dismissive, it was genuine. She went back to her duties, trying to shake off the odd sense of curiosity that lingered. As the minutes ticked by, she could not help but notice when he pulled out a pen and wrote something on the receipt. He tucked it beneath the empty coffee cup, stood, and left with his quiet entourage. The sound of the door chime marked his exit, leaving her with the now empty table. When she picked up the receipt, the sight of the tip nearly knocked the wind out of her. 4 figures stared back at her, but it was not just the number that made her hands tremble. Beneath the total was a note. "Your kindness and hard work do not go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The weight of his words hit her harder than the generous tip.
Very nice to see you. Hello, how are you? Very nice. Good to see you. You too.
She sank into the chair he had vacated, tears welling up as she read the note over and over. It was not about the money. It was the acknowledgement, the empathy, the recognition that her struggles were visible, even to someone who did not know her. Her manager noticed her teary-eyed expression and asked what had happened. When she showed the receipt, her manager's jaw dropped. The story spread quickly within the cafe, and soon whispers about Barron Trump's gesture reached her co-workers. They marveled at the tip, the note, and the fact that someone so high-profile had taken a moment to make a connection. By the next day, the story had made its way beyond the cafe walls. Photos of the note and the receipt were circulating online, and the waitress found herself the unexpected center of attention. Social media was abuzz with comments praising Barron's act of kindness and debating the meaning behind his words. Some called it a publicity stunt, while others argued it was a sincere gesture from someone who understood the value of hard work. For her, the sudden fame was overwhelming. The cafe became busier than ever, with customers hoping to catch a glimpse of the now famous waitress. Reporters even showed up, eager for an interview. She tried to keep her head down, focusing on her work, but it was impossible to ignore the spotlight. Offers to appear on morning shows flooded in, but she hesitated. She did not want to turn this moment into a spectacle. The note was not about fame or fortune, it was about kindness, about being seen. After much thought, she agreed to one interview, determined to shift the focus from the money to the message. In the studio, she recounted the moment she read the note, her voice steady but emotional. She emphasized how much the words meant to her, especially during a time when she felt invisible. It was not about the money, she said. It was about being reminded that someone noticed, that someone cared. The interview resonated with viewers, sparking conversations about the importance of small acts of kindness. The story was not just about a waitress and a famous customer, it became a symbol of hope for many who were struggling. And for her, it was a moment she would carry with her, a reminder that brighter days might just be around the corner. When she returned to the cafe the next day, the atmosphere was different. Regular customers offered warm smiles and kind words. Some even left notes of their own, small tokens of encouragement scrawled on napkins or receipts. Her co-workers, once indifferent, now treated her with a newfound respect. The story continued to ripple outward. News outlets picked up on the narrative, each adding their own spin. The note and the tip became a point of debate and discussion. Some focused on Barron's identity, others on the waitress's reaction, but the core message remained unchanged. An act of kindness had cut through the noise of daily life and reminded people of their shared humanity. The waitress's own life began to shift in small but meaningful ways. The financial relief from the tip eased some of her immediate burdens, but it was the words that stayed with her. In quiet moments, she would pull the note from her wallet and read it again, drawing strength from its message. As her life took an unexpected turn, another story began in a place where chance often reshapes lives, bridging generations mid-flight. The morning was brisk at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, with a buzz of activity filling the air. Passengers hurried to their gates, juggling carry-ons and cups of coffee, as Flight 247 prepared for its journey to Newark. The flight was fully booked, every seat claimed. Among the travelers, a tall, lanky teenager sat quietly in first class. His face familiar to many, but his demeanor understated. Barron Trump, a figure often shielded from public life, occupied a window seat engrossed in a hardcover book. At well over 6 feet tall, his presence was notable, though he seemed to prefer the solitude his corner provided. In the economy section, a different figure was drawing subtle attention. An elderly man in his 70s shuffled down the aisle, his silver hair neatly combed, his military jacket adorned with faded patches and medals. He carried a leather duffel bag, its worn edges suggesting years of use. His steps were deliberate, his posture slightly hunched. Passengers glanced at him, some whispering, others offering small nods of respect. He took a seat at the back of the plane, squeezed between a businessman and a young mother with a restless toddler. The usual pre-flight commotion unfolded. Flight attendants ushered passengers, overhead bins were slammed shut, and announcements filled the cabin. A moment of tension surfaced when the elderly man's seat proved uncomfortable. He shifted in his cramped spot, clearly struggling to settle. Nearby passengers noticed his distress, their quiet conversations and occasional stares reflecting concern. The man's military jacket, with its faded insignias and medals, spoke of decades past and sacrifices made, and this added an air of poignancy to his visible discomfort. In first class, the teenager's attention turned toward the commotion at the rear of the plane. Barron Trump observed the situation, his gaze steady as he took in the scene. A moment later, he pressed the call button to summon a flight attendant. The interaction that followed was calm but purposeful. Soon, the flight attendant walked toward the elderly man, pausing to speak quietly with him. Passengers nearby watched with growing interest, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding events. Barron stood, reaching for his carry-on bag with an unhurried movement. His decision to leave first class and offer his seat to the elderly man sent a ripple through the cabin. The murmurs in first class grew louder as passengers exchanged surprised glances. A woman seated nearby furrowed her brow, her expression a mixture of disbelief and mild disapproval, but she said nothing further. As the tall teenager moved through the aisle toward the back of the plane, passengers craned their necks. Some leaned into the aisles for a better view, while others subtly reached for their phones, angling them to snap photos of the unusual gesture. When Barron arrived at the rear of the plane, the elderly man looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. After a brief pause, the man accepted the offer. With slow, deliberate movements, he rose from his seat and made his way toward the front of the plane. The teenager slid into the now vacant economy seat, folding his long legs into the limited space with some effort. Passengers around him whispered to one another, their conversations filled with speculation and admiration for what had just occurred. The elderly man settled into the plush first-class seat, adjusting the armrest and reclining slightly. A flight attendant approached him with a blanket and a beverage, her demeanor warm and attentive. The man's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the items, his face reflecting a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. The act of kindness seemed to transform the atmosphere within the cabin, softening the usual anonymity of air travel. Passengers who moments ago had been absorbed in their own concerns now shared a collective sense of curiosity and respect. As the flight reached cruising altitude, the cabin's energy shifted further. Passengers in first class leaned toward one another, whispering about the unusual event. The elderly man's presence in the upgraded seat sparked additional conversations. His military jacket, worn but dignified, became a focal point of attention. Passengers speculated about his story, their imaginations filling in the gaps left by his quiet demeanor. The man's gaze shifted out the window for a time before he appeared to gather his thoughts. He adjusted his posture, his hands resting on the armrests as he seemed to reflect on the moment. Nearby, a middle-aged woman seated in first class noticed his contemplative expression and began speaking with him. What emerged from their quiet conversation began to ripple through the rows of seats. Decades earlier, during the Vietnam War, the elderly man had been a young soldier serving overseas in a conflict that left him physically and emotionally scarred. Upon returning to the United States, he faced significant challenges, including limited resources and a lack of support. In the midst of these struggles, he encountered an unexpected act of generosity that altered the course of his life. A man had seen his plight and offered him both shelter and employment, asking for nothing in return. The man's name, Fred Trump, resonated deeply with those listening. Passengers nearby leaned closer as the story unfolded, their interest growing. The elderly man described how Fred Trump had provided him with a second chance during one of the most difficult periods of his life. He spoke with gratitude, his voice steady despite the emotions underlying his words. The story spread among the passengers like wildfire, with snippets of the conversation passing from row to row. The connection between the elderly man's story and the young man who had offered him his seat seemed almost too remarkable to be coincidental. In economy, Barron Trump remained unaware of the full impact of his gesture. He appeared focused on his book, occasionally shifting to adjust his position in the cramped space. Passengers around him continued to steal glances, their admiration unspoken but evident in their expressions. The teenager's calm demeanor contrasted with the quiet excitement spreading throughout the cabin. The atmosphere within the plane became almost surreal. Conversations that began as whispers grew more animated as passengers shared their thoughts and reflections. A young mother in row 15 spoke softly to her daughter, explaining the significance of the day's events. A businessman seated several rows away remarked on how rare such gestures had become, his tone tinged with both admiration and melancholy. The flight attendants, moving through the aisles with drinks and snacks, seemed equally moved by the unfolding story. As the plane continued its journey, the elderly man's story continued to resonate. Passengers in first class shared their own thoughts, some recalling moments of kindness they had experienced, others reflecting on the importance of gratitude. The mood within the cabin was unlike anything typically associated with air travel. The usual monotony of a routine flight had given way to an atmosphere of connection and shared humanity. The elderly man's quiet dignity and the teenager's selfless gesture created a moment that transcended the confines of the airplane. In first class, the man's story of resilience and gratitude became a focal point, drawing passengers together in a way that few could have anticipated. In economy, Barron Trump's unassuming presence served as a quiet reminder of the power of small acts of kindness. The ripple effect of the day's events was evident in the interactions among passengers. Strangers exchanged smiles and nods, their usual detachment replaced by a sense of camaraderie. The flight attendants, often tasked with managing the small inconveniences of air travel, seemed to take on a more meaningful role as they navigated the cabin. The atmosphere remained charged with emotion, the story of the teenager's gesture and the elderly man's journey weaving itself into the fabric of the shared experience. As the plane began its descent into Newark, the sense of connection within the cabin only deepened. Passengers prepared to disembark, their movements purposeful but unhurried. The elderly man stood from his first-class seat, his posture more upright than it had been at the start of the flight. He made his way toward the rear of the plane, his steps measured but deliberate. When he reached the economy section, he paused near the teenager who had given up his seat. The brief exchange that followed was watched by many, their attention unwavering. The elderly man's gratitude was evident in his expression and his gestures. The teenager's response was equally composed, his demeanor reflecting both humility and resolve. The interaction was brief, but its impact was profound, leaving an indelible impression on those who witnessed it. After an act of quiet generosity, the focus shifts to a young man navigating a world of constant attention, a private life in a public family. The youngest child of Donald Trump and Melania Trump, Barron Trump, was born in 2006. As the only child from Donald's third marriage, the youngest member of the family has always lived a life shrouded in some mystery. Shielded from the spotlight, many wonder about the true nature of the father-son relationship. When Donald became the young Trump's father, he was already 60 years old and immersed in his high-profile life as a businessman and television personality. Such a significant age gap does not always make for easy bonding. Consider this: a teenager and a man who was already a grandfather when the boy was born. It is easy to imagine hurdles in finding common ground. Adding to this is Donald's career, packed with busy schedules, public appearances, and political turbulence. Naturally, their time together would be limited. Melania, by contrast, has played an active role in raising her son. She made it a priority to avoid relying on nannies and to keep his upbringing as normal as possible. Her hands-on approach and protective nature have been defining features of the youngest Trump's early years. This close bond with his mother likely shaped much of his childhood and may have influenced how he relates to his father. With Melania so present, Donald's role may not have been as central during his son's formative years. During Donald's presidency, the youngest Trump made only a few public appearances. When father and son were seen together at events, their interactions appeared formal. The younger Trump often stood apart, not exuding the warm, easygoing rapport one might expect. Observers have noted that Donald seemed more visibly connected to his older children, who are actively involved in the family's business and political ventures. This contrast in public behavior highlights a potentially more distant relationship. As the youngest Trump grows older, subtle signs of change have emerged. Reports suggest he has shared ideas such as campaign strategies aimed at connecting with younger audiences. Donald is said to have taken some of these suggestions seriously, indicating that his son's input is beginning to hold weight. These rare moments hint at a potential shift in their relationship dynamic as he matures into adulthood. Despite these glimpses, the Trump family has worked hard to keep the youngest member's life private. Even with the weight of fame and scrutiny tied to their name, he has largely stayed out of the public eye. This level of privacy is rare for such a prominent family, adding to the intrigue surrounding their relationship. The generational gap between father and son also plays a role in shaping their bond. Donald, born in 1946, was raised in a time with vastly different values and cultural norms compared to his Generation Z offspring. These differences might pose challenges to their ability to relate on certain levels. While Donald's older children grew up during his early business years, the youngest Trump's upbringing has occurred under the intense spotlight of Donald's political career, introducing another layer of complexity. Melania's influence is another critical factor. Known for fiercely protecting her son, she has reportedly gone to great lengths to shield him from media attention and the chaos that often surrounds the Trump name. Her strong maternal presence likely affects how the youngest Trump views his family and interacts with his father. Public observations suggest their relationship leans more toward formality than intimacy. When seen at events together, the youngest Trump's composed body language and noticeable distance from his father stand out. In contrast, Donald's interactions with older children like Ivanka or Eric appear more engaged and publicly affectionate, drawing inevitable comparisons. While the youngest Trump's public involvement in family matters has been minimal, small signs suggest he is beginning to find his place. Reports of his contributions to media strategies may indicate a growing role within the Trump world, though these moments remain rare and understated. Is the youngest Trump just a private person figuring out his path, or is he purposefully staying out of the spotlight as part of the Trump family's bigger story? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more updates.